In today's video, we're counting down 3 internet Karens that got eaten alive by animals. From a brown bear who mauled an entitled camper to a safari guest who broke rules was dragged by a lion. But first, let's talk about a hiker who thought laws didn't apply to her, unaware that a predator was already watching her children. It was April 14th, 2018, and the late afternoon light filtered through the coastal oaks along the closed section of Pine Ridge Trail in the Santa Lucia Range. Reina Calderon walked 30 yards behind her 2 children, unaware that her habit of letting them run unsupervised was about to be catastrophic. Reina was a 37-year-old real estate assistant who lived in Cambria. She had been hiking the trails for 8 years. Other hikers said that she prided herself on being no-nonsense, publicly calling out rangers and other hikers she labeled overcautious, and insisting she was experienced enough to make her own judgments about safety protocols. They said that her social media posts often mocked helicopter parents and encouraged others to flout posted rules, and she routinely allowed her children, ages 6 and 9, to run ahead on trails, sometimes disappearing around bends while she walked at her own pace. That Saturday, she had decided to take her 2 sons on what she described to her husband as a quick afternoon hike, despite the trail closure signs posted at the trailhead. She had parked at the Los Padres Day Use area and walked past the closure gate, which had been left partially open by previous trespassers. The trail closure notice specifically cited multiple mountain lion sightings within a quarter mile of the trail and advised hikers to avoid the area entirely until further notice. Mountain lions, also called cougars or pumas, are North America's second largest cat species, with adults typically weighing between 90 and 160 pounds and measuring 6 to 8 feet from nose to tail. They are ambush predators with explosive power, capable of vertical leaps exceeding 15 feet, and short burst sprints at very high speeds over limited distances. Their jaws are powerful enough to crush neck structures and inflict catastrophic trauma in a single bite, with canine teeth up to 2 inches long, designed to puncture vital structures in the neck and skull. Mountain lions typically avoid humans, but defensive attacks occur when they perceive threats to kills or kittens, or when surprised at close range. They are most dangerous during dusk and dawn hunting hours, and children running or moving erratically can trigger predatory or defensive responses. Wildlife officials universally recommend keeping children within arm's reach in mountain lion country and making noise to avoid surprise encounters. The section of trail Reina had chosen wound through dense scrub with walls of vegetation on both sides that limited sightlines to 15 or 20 feet in many places. The path curved frequently, following the natural contours of the hillside. At approximately 5:40 p.m., according to the witness statement of another hiker who had entered the closed trail from the opposite direction, Reina's 2 boys were running ahead, their voices carrying back through the still air. Reina's sons had rounded a blind curve approximately 40 yards ahead of their mother, when the younger boy ran directly past a mountain lion that had been either resting or feeding in the dense brush just off the trail. The animal was later determined to be an adult female, estimated at 110 pounds based on paw measurements. The lion reacted to the child's sudden proximity with a defensive strike, lunging from cover and tackling the 6-year-old boy from behind. The child's screams were immediate and high-pitched. His older brother began screaming as well and stumbled backward. One of the kids said that Reina came running around the curve within seconds. The witness, who was approximately 60 yards away on the opposite side of the curve, heard the sequence clearly: children's screams, an adult woman shouting, then a different quality of scream, deeper, more primal, followed by thrashing sounds in the undergrowth. He ran toward the sounds, pulling his phone from his pocket and immediately dialing 911. He reached the curve and saw the attack in progress, a tawny shape on top of a woman's body in the vegetation, the woman's legs kicking weakly, dark blood visible on the ground and spreading across the dirt trail. He shouted and waved his arms, his voice cracking. The 9-year-old boy was standing frozen on the trail, his face blank with shock. The younger boy was still on the ground, bleeding from lacerations to his scalp and back, crying in broken gasps. Reina later showed defensive wounds consistent with her charging directly at the lion while it was on top of her son. The lion released the child and pivoted toward the larger threat. Reina had covered perhaps 10 feet when the animal launched itself at her chest height, its trajectory explosive and precise. She had no time to raise her arms or turn away. The lion's front paws struck her upper chest and right shoulder, claws extending and puncturing through her cotton shirt into muscle and collarbone, the impact staggering her backward. Its jaws closed on her neck in a single fluid motion, inflicting catastrophic neck trauma with immediate vascular and airway compromise. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Massive hemorrhage began within seconds, rapidly soaking her shirt and the animal's muzzle. Rena's legs gave out almost instantly, her body collapsing as the animal's weight drove her sideways into the brush at the trail's edge. The older brother said that her hands came up reflexively, gripping the lion's fur, but her strength likely faded rapidly as blood pressure collapsed. The lion maintained its grip on Rena's neck for approximately 8 to 10 seconds according to the witness's estimate, though he acknowledged time felt distorted. The pressure completely occluded blood flow to her brain. Her kicking slowed, then stopped. Her hands fell away from the lion's body and dropped into the dirt. The lion released its bite and stepped back, its muzzle and chest fur matted with blood. It turned and bounded into the dense chaparral, disappearing within seconds. The witness ran to Rena first. She was lying on her side, her head at an unnatural angle, her neck showing extensive traumatic injury with massive blood loss. Blood had pooled beneath her head and soaked into the sandy soil, forming a dark, spreading stain. Her eyes were open but unseeing, and she was not breathing. The 911 dispatcher kept him on the line, instructing him to check for breathing and pulse while also assessing the injured child. Paramedics and wildlife officers arrived via the access road at approximately 6:07 p.m., 24 minutes after the call. They found Rena unresponsive, with catastrophic neck trauma and exsanguination. No resuscitation was attempted, given the obvious nature of her injuries, and time elapsed. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Her 6-year-old son, whose name was withheld from public reports, had sustained deep lacerations to his scalp, neck, and upper back, with tissue trauma consistent with large carnivore bite and claw marks. He was airlifted to the hospital in critical condition. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as exsanguination and catastrophic cerebral hypoxia due to bilateral carotid artery trauma from a mountain lion bite, with contributing airway compromise. The time of death was within approximately 1 minute of the initial attack. The 6-year-old boy died 3 days later from complications related to his injuries, including infection and traumatic shock. Wildlife officers tracked and killed the female mountain lion the following morning. Necropsy revealed she had 2 young kittens nearby, explaining the defensive nature of the attack. Rena's husband declined media interviews, and the family held a private memorial service attended only by close relatives. The older son, who witnessed the entire attack, was placed in counseling. No legal action was taken against any party, as the trail closure had been clearly posted, and the attack was determined to be a foreseeable consequence of human intrusion into closed wildlife habitat during a period of known mountain lion activity. While a rule-breaking mother and her child ends in the jaws of a predator, a woman at a campground would step from her tent at dawn to confront the brown bear already feeding from her fish coolers, unaware that it can charge faster than she could process. It was July 3rd, 2016, and the first light of an Alaskan summer morning was just breaking over the unregulated campground 12 miles east of the Denali Highway, where Colleen Hartwell was about to step out of her tent and into the final 2 minutes of her life. Colleen was a 51-year-old seasonal craft vendor who spent her summers traveling Alaska's highway system, selling handmade jewelry and leather goods at roadside pullouts and informal markets. She had been coming to this particular campground for 7 years, drawn by its proximity to tourist traffic and its lack of fees or regulations. Her reputation among the other regulars was mixed at best. She was known as territorial, quick to anger, and dismissive of anyone who questioned her methods. She had been cited twice by authorities for improper food storage, both times paying the fine and continuing her habits unchanged. Friends from the craft circuit described her as stubborn and independent to a fault, someone who saw rules as suggestions meant for tourists and city people, not for Alaskans like herself who understood the land. Her setup that summer was typical: a canvas wall tent, folding tables for her merchandise, and an aging pickup truck she used for both transport and storage. She supplemented her income by fishing the nearby Susitna River tributaries, keeping what she caught in coolers that she rarely bothered to secure properly. Her goal for the holiday weekend was simple: sell enough jewelry to cover her August expenses and catch enough grayling to fill her freezer. The campground was busy with 4th of July travelers, families with children spread across a dozen informal sites along the tree line, and several long-term campers who knew Colleen by reputation. At least 3 people had approached her on July 2nd suggesting she secure her food better, and she had told each of them, in increasingly hostile terms, to mind their own business. Brown bears in interior Alaska can weigh between 400 and 800 pounds, with males often exceeding 600 pounds by midsummer when salmon runs, and berry crops have allowed them to bulk up. They are opportunistic omnivores with an extraordinary sense of smell, capable of detecting food sources from miles away. And once a bear becomes food conditioned, it loses its natural wariness and begins actively seeking out campsites, trash, and unsecured food. Wildlife biologists consider food-conditioned bears among the most dangerous, as they have learned that humans are not threats, but sources of nutrition, and they will defend food aggressively. Multiple campers reported seeing a large brown bear moving through the area on the evening of July 2nd. At least 2 people had mentioned the sighting to Colleen directly that evening when she returned from fishing. She had 3 good-sized grayling, and rather than clean them away from camp or dispose of the remains properly, she had gutted them on a plastic tarp beside her tent and placed the cleaned fish in a styrofoam cooler. Her neighbor, a man named Dale Pritchard, who ran a small guiding service, had approached her around 10 p.m. and told her she was asking for trouble. Colleen responded with open hostility, telling him to mind his own business and accusing him of trying to boss her around, ending the exchange by cursing at him. The bear returned sometime between 4:30 and 5 a.m. Several campers later reported hearing noises, something heavy moving through brush, the distinctive sound of plastic being torn. Dale woke to the sound of the cooler lid being flipped open and looked out to see the bear's silhouette clearly outlined in the brightening dawn, its massive head buried in Colleen's food storage. He reached for his bear spray and radio, but hesitated as the bear and Colleen's tent were nearly aligned in his line of fire, and before he could reposition, movement caught his eye. Colleen had emerged from her tent. She was wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, no shoes. According to multiple witness statements given to wildlife troopers, she immediately began shouting at the bear, her voice loud and aggressive. The bear raised its head from the cooler. Fish remains visible in its jaws. Instead of retreating into her tent or backing away slowly, Colleen grabbed a camp chair and began advancing toward the bear, raising the chair above her head and continuing to yell. Dale Pritchard called out a warning from his tent, but Colleen ignored him. The bear dropped the fish and took 2 steps toward her, its head lowering slightly, a sign of aggression that Colleen either didn't recognize or didn't respect. She was now less than 20 feet from an animal that outweighed her by at least 500 pounds. The charge happened in less than 3 seconds. The bear closed the distance with shocking speed, its body moving with the mechanical efficiency of a predator that had decided Colleen was a threat to its food source. It hit her with its right front paw in a sweeping motion that connected with her upper chest and shoulder, the impact audible to witnesses as a distinct thud followed immediately by the crack of breaking bone. Colleen's sternum fractured on impact, ribs collapsing inward, and she was lifted off her feet and thrown backward nearly 6 feet, landing hard on her back. The bear was on her before she could move. It reared up briefly, then dropped its full weight onto her torso, pinning her to the ground. The crushing force collapsed her chest cavity further, her ribs puncturing her left lung. Her screams woke several nearby campsites within roughly 100 yards. The bear's jaws closed around her head, just above the left ear, its canines punching through the temporal bone and into her brain. For nearly 2 minutes after her screaming stopped, the bear continued its attack, biting repeatedly at her chest and neck. Her body had gone limp within 30 seconds of the throat bite, blood pooling rapidly beneath her, but the bear kept mauling the body with mechanical persistence. It bit through her upper chest, ribs cracking audibly with each compression. Dale radioed wildlife troopers, giving their GPS coordinates and describing an active bear mauling. The nearest ranger station was in Cantwell, approximately 32 miles away by road. After brutal minutes, the bear had stopped biting and was standing over Colleen's body, breathing heavily, blood covering its muzzle and chest. It picked up the remains of a fish from the cooler and walked slowly back into the tree line, disappearing into dense brush. Rangers arrived 38 minutes after the initial call. They found Colleen dead, her body lying in a pool of blood approximately 15 feet from her tent. The preliminary assessment documented massive trauma to the head, throat, and chest. The skull showed multiple crush fractures and puncture wounds consistent with bear dentition. Her throat had been largely torn away, exposing the cervical spine. Ribs on both sides of her chest were broken, with several protruding through the skin. The attending medical examiner later determined cause of death to be massive head trauma and exsanguination secondary to carotid artery rupture. Wildlife officers tracked the bear through the morning, following disturbed vegetation, blood sign, and fresh scat, and it was located approximately 2 miles from the campground and euthanized by rifle. Necropsy revealed it was a 12-year-old male weighing 640 pounds, with significant human food waste in its digestive system. The campground was closed temporarily, and signs were posted warning of bear activity. Colleen's family declined media interviews. Her truck and merchandise were removed by her brother 2 weeks later, while Colleen Hartwell's unsecured coolers drew death to her tent at first light. An office administrator on the edge of a Limpopo safari lodge would step beyond the lantern line at dusk to smoke, unaware that a male lion had already marked her. It was September 18, 2014, and the last rays of equatorial sun were bleeding through the acacia trees at the edge of a safari lodge near Hoedspruit, Limpopo. Marieke Vosloo stepped past the perimeter lanterns with a cigarette between her lips, about to discover that an apex predator doesn't distinguish between arrogance and ignorance when identifying prey. Marieke was a 42-year-old office administrator for a telecommunications firm in Pretoria. Her colleagues described her as confrontational and dismissive of workplace safety protocols, the type who removed hard hat requirements from her department's checklist because she found them inconvenient. At the lodge, she had quickly developed a reputation among staff and other guests, loudly complaining during the welcome briefing that the after-dark escort policy was ridiculous, that lions didn't come this close to lodges, and that the rangers were being overcautious to justify their salaries. She was a heavy smoker, going through nearly 2 packs daily, and had berated staff twice on her second day when they insisted someone accompany her outside the guest zone after sunset for her cigarette breaks. The morning safety briefing had been explicit. Guests were not to leave the designated lantern-lit zone after sunset. The head ranger, Peter Dutoit, had explained during lunch that fresh tracks indicated at least 2 male lions had been ranging along the eastern perimeter for the past 3 days. That afternoon, a lodge attendant named Thandi had directly warned Marieke after finding her smoking near the property edge during daylight, explaining that lions often use the same approach routes repeatedly, and that dusk was their most active hunting period. Marieke had responded by shouting that she hadn't paid this much money to be imprisoned. African lions are apex predators capable of taking down prey several times their body weight, with males weighing between 350 and 550 pounds. While lions are primarily nocturnal hunters, they remain active during twilight hours when failing light provides tactical advantage. Young adult males, recently expelled from their birth prides and not yet strong enough to challenge established males for territory, often range widely and hunt opportunistically, sometimes targeting easier prey than their usual quarry. At approximately 6:40 p.m., 20 minutes after sunset, Marieke walked out of her chalet carrying her cigarettes and lighter. 2 couples sitting on the main deck watched her stride purposefully toward the eastern edge of the lawn. One of them later told investigators he had assumed she was walking to the fire pit area, which was still within the safe zone. Instead, she continued past the last lantern post, stepping over the boundary into an area of knee-high grass and scattered thorn bush. The couples on the deck lost sight of her almost immediately as she moved into deeper shadow. Marieke walked approximately 40 feet past the boundary, then crouched low near a dense acacia shrub, likely seeking shelter from the evening wind and flying insects while she smoked. The young adult male lion had been lying in a shallow depression, roughly 80 feet from the lodge perimeter for at least an hour, based on compressed vegetation later documented by wildlife officials. He was an estimated 4 years old, approximately 380 pounds, recently separated from his natal pride and ranging the area in search of food and territory. The failing light of dusk provided optimal hunting conditions, and human movement near the boundary had likely drawn his attention earlier in the evening. When Marieke moved into the open and then crouched in a posture that mimicked vulnerability, the lion began his approach. He moved through the scrub, using established game trails that kept him low and concealed, his tawny coat blending perfectly with the dry grass. Marieke remained crouched, facing away from his approach, her attention on lighting her cigarette. She never saw him coming. One of the tourists, still on the deck, caught movement in his peripheral vision and turned to see the lion already launching from the tall grass. The animal covered the final 8 feet in a single explosive bound, forepaws extended, claws deployed. The impact knocked Marieke forward and down with such force that witnesses heard the collision from 60 feet away. A heavy, meaty sound followed immediately by her scream. The lion's weight, roughly 380 pounds hitting at speed, drove her chest and face into the ground, compressing her ribcage. His forepaws pinned her shoulders, claws sinking deep into the muscle and flesh of her upper back, creating massive, tearing wounds that immediately began bleeding profusely through her shirt. Before she could draw breath to scream again, the lion's jaws clamped across the back of her head and her face simultaneously, the upper canines puncturing through the back of her skull. The bite exerted crushing pressure, fracturing bones. Her single scream cut off instantly. The lion began dragging her backward toward deeper cover, her body sliding limply through the dirt as he pulled, his jaws still locked on her head. Blood poured from the wounds, soaking into the ground and leaving a drag trail clearly visible in the dust. The lion pulled her approximately 15 feet into a thicker stand of thorn scrub, then released his grip and repositioned. The next bite targeted the back of her neck, his jaws closing around her cervical spine. The lion shook his head violently, the motion whipping her body back and forth like a rag doll, her arms flopping loosely. He bit again, higher on the neck, then again on her upper back. The low, rumbling growl of the feeding lion continued for another 20 seconds before the animal paused, apparently sensing the commotion from the lodge. One of the guests had been screaming for help from the moment of impact. The lodge attendant heard him and immediately radioed the ranger station while running toward the main office. The lodge manager, who was armed with a shotgun per protocol, grabbed the weapon and sprinted toward the eastern perimeter, but stopped at the boundary, lacking a clear line of fire in the darkness, and aware that guests were nearby. Unable to see the victim or the lion clearly, and unwilling to risk provoking an attack in low visibility, Peter, the head ranger, was already on duty nearby conducting evening perimeter checks at the staff quarters 400 yards away when the call came through. He arrived in a Toyota Land Cruiser equipped with a spotlight 7 minutes after the initial attack. He immediately spotted the lion crouched over Marieke's body in the scrub. Peter fired 2 warning shots from his rifle. The lion released the body and retreated rapidly into deeper bush, disappearing within seconds. Peter approached on foot with his rifle raised, accompanied by another armed ranger who had arrived moments after. They found Marieke lying face down in the thorn bush. Massive trauma was immediately visible. Her face and jaw were largely destroyed, with deep puncture wounds through her skull, and her neck showed severe cervical disruption with exposed vertebrae and destroyed musculature. Peter declared her dead at the scene. The coroner's report, issued 3 days later, listed the cause of death as massive cranial and spinal trauma resulting from African lion attack. The Safari Lodge suspended all guest activities immediately and closed for 2 nights, while wildlife officials conducted an investigation and tracked the lion. The animal was located the following morning and was not destroyed, as officials determined his behavior was a natural predatory response. Marieke's body was transported to Pretoria, where her ex-husband arranged cremation. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.